Right, I think we will go ahead and get started. Aloha, welcome to Cacao Across the Islands, a conversation with award-winning cacao growers, offering key lessons learned for the post-harvest processing of premium quality cacao in Hawaii at diverse sites and scales from Hamakua to Kapa'a. This is a farmer-to-farmer event hosted by Oahu Resource Conservation and Development Council, with the generous support and partnership of the Hawaii Department of Agriculture's Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, USDA NIFA, and the Hawaii Chocolate and Cacao Association. Mahalo to everyone for being with us today. This promises to be an insightful conversation with a few of the cacao farmers who have been successful at putting Hawaii on the map over the last 10 years or so as an origin of world-class cacao. So post-harvest processing is fascinating, right? So much happens between the moment that the ripe cacao pod is picked off the tree until finished dry cacao beans are stored for shipment, whether that's shipment to a chocolate factory on another continent, or as is usually the case here in Hawaii, just a few miles away on the same island. So from the microbiology of fermentation to that really meticulous drying, lengthy drying process that's used, there's just a lot to unpack there. But based on the awards that have been rolling in over the last few years, even though Hawaii is a very new origin for cacao, it's earned some impressive accolades, and we're starting to get some things right. We've got multiple Good Food Award winners, multiple Cacao of Excellent designations, that means top 50 in the world, and a ton of Pacific Northwest Chocolate Festival awards and numerous others. We know there's a lot that goes into making fine chocolate. Varietal selection is a huge variable in flavor. Terroir is a popular topic to debate. And there's even some new work going on we're going to hear more about later on in this conversation about varietal selections that's going on right here in Hawaii. But post-harvest processing is something that's often unsung. It's a really underestimated component to developing premium quality cacao. And it's something that can be particularly challenging here in Hawaii's unique and diverse growing regions. So we can tell from the response to today's webinar that there's tremendous interest in fermentation and drying of cacao. We've received a lot of great questions from registrants, and we're going to get to those a little later in our Q&A. So let me share with you a little bit about how our webinar is set up. Rather than present kind of a cookie cutter, one size fits all how-to on fermentation and drying, which can often really miss the requirements of specific sites, we're going to hear directly from leaders in today's flourishing tree-to-bar industry. They're going to take us on a deep dive into how they approach post-harvest processing in their operation. And I promise you, you're going to pick up some really valuable pro tips and lessons learned along the way. So before we get started, let me cover a little bit of housekeeping. This is going to be a panel, a farmer-to-farmer panel. We've got 6 folks joining us. Will Lidgate from Lidgate Farms, John Ching from Waialua Estates, Susan Bassett from Mauna Kea Cacao, Sage Hugh from Deep Dirt Cacao, Seneca Klassen from Lonohana Estate Chocolate, and Dan O'Doherty from Maui Kuia Estate Chocolate. I've got a couple of our great staff members from Oahu RC&D online with us, Sophie Moser, Augusto de Castro, Logan Motas. Thank you guys for being here. If anybody has any issues with the sound or audio or other technical issues, just reach out in the chat and somebody from the Oahu RC&D team will help you. You can also, I guess the best thing to do would be to email if you get kicked off or for some reason and can't use the chat, to email Sophie at oahurcd.org. Let's see, what other things can we share? We will be taping today's webinar to make it available via the Oahu RC&D website and YouTube. So if you have any cacao farming friends that couldn't be here today, or maybe they're out in the field, let them know it'll be out there soon on oahurcd.org. Okay, taking care of that, let's dive right in and get the conversation started. We've asked each of these farmers to provide kind of a quick overview of their farm site because they're spread across the state, and the fermentation and drying process they've developed. And then to dig in to share one of the challenges at their sites and some of the technology or tricks they're using to overcome it and produce premium quality cacao on a consistent basis. So let's get the panel and the conversation kicked off. Panelists, a quick reminder, just make sure you unmute your microphone when you start. And we will get started now with Will Lydgate. Will is joining us from the east side of Hawaii, where he owns and operates Lydgate Farms. Lydgate Farms produces cacao beans that have been rated in the top 50 in the world by the Cocoa of Excellence Awards. Will believed that Hawaii would be a center of innovation in cacao production because of our unique position as the only state in the USA where chocolate can be grown. Will, how's it going over on Kauai?
Oh, wow. Thanks, Dave. I forgot I had sent over that little blurb, but it sounded good to me. Aloha kako. Such a pleasure to be here. Stoked to see all the interest. This is some serious panelists. I'm really excited to just kind of see what everyone's been doing too. I don't think we've ever done anything like this. Post-harvest sort of tends to be slightly veiled with, this is what we do. And I think that sharing this stuff is what's going to grow this industry. So really want to say big mahalos. Dave Elliott, everyone at Oahu RC&D, love that org. And so I was asked to kind of go through our post-harvest. First of all, I don't think you can really talk about post-harvest processing in Hawaii without giving Dan O'Doherty a ton of credit. Really excited to see his presentation. I saw maybe a little inoculum photo in that. Don't know what he's going to talk about. I'm going to do my thing here, but Dan's been out front for years. If you have a chance to work with him, he's definitely very knowledgeable on this subject. So yes, Lydgate Farms, east side of Kauai. We're on 46 acres, about 7 of that in cacao trees. Maybe about 3,000 trees, something like that. Our biggest harvest, several hundred pounds at a time of wet seed. That's probably, I don't know, maybe 800 pounds of wet seed at the biggest kind of peak season. So we could go to the first slide. So this is just scooping cacao into buckets. Like some of you, we're sort of heavily using the greatest resource in the Hawaiian Islands, which is the visitors, and also secondarily retired people, if you haven't figured that out, to engage in this process. So we heavy farm tours, direct sales to visitors, suitcase exports, edible souvenirs. And on the harvest day, we go drop all the pods with the farm team. In the afternoon, we have a gaggle of volunteers come. They scoop pods, we feed them. It's a lot of fun. So this is that happening there. Wet seed is scooped into buckets where it is measured and weighed, and we can calculate the yield from each field basically by how we deal with the buckets. And then that gets transferred to a fermentation area. Next slide. So one of the most magical things about chocolate, the many magical things about chocolate, is the incredible flavor of the sweet pulp around the seed, which I'm guessing most of you have enjoyed. So you can actually drip off excess juice, which we call cacao nectar, and I would suggest that would be what we call it in the state, because nectar is a great word in the English language, can be called other things, cacao juice. I just like nectar. Don't you like that? Instead of juice, nectar. So this is obviously a stage shot showing just a way more nectar than is ever in a pod. But it does show that nice drip there, which is really great. So historically, we've always collected all of the nectar, and we used to collect a lot of cacao juice drippings. We started out using the skip bitten bender method. So we planted our first trees in 2002. And when we first started harvesting, basically, no one really knew anything. Skip was the guy who knew stuff, and we would ferment in small amounts in those hollowed out refrigerators. But in that time, we got in the practice of saving cacao nectar. So now we're using box fermentation. Our boxes are 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. They hold about 120 kilograms of wet seed at the right height. We like it between 12 and 18 inches. And so obviously you can't do that old style fermentation, but we tend to keep this juice. So for years, I used to buy this basically cacao fermentation starter from Dan O'Doherty. And then I don't remember exactly how it happened, but at one point we couldn't get it. and I just had some cacao nectar that I left out. So next slide. I left it out, and I don't know what happened. I think it was intentional. I think I actually had one with some really old inoculum, and I just put one like as a control. And I actually think a little midge or a little fruit fly might have landed in that. And a couple of days later, it was kind of bubbling. I had a microbiologist friend that was like, hey, what's going on here? She said, oh, it's saccharization. There's some CO2 getting made in there. I was like, okay. So I didn't know it, but I had just basically made a homespun mixed microbial culture perfect for fermenting cacao. So that photo you're seeing right there is a fully propped up, basically cacao fermentation starter. Do you need them? Don't you need them? You know, that's a subject of debate. And I think, you know, again, I would defer to Dan O'Doherty in this. He's been doing this stuff for years. That said, it really does provide consistent fermentations. And if I had one tool that I could give to a starting cacao grower, you want to have great fermentations, use a little bit of starter, especially if you're fermenting smaller amounts, you know, under 100 kilograms of wet seed, whatever. So you're going to get, next slide. If you don't, and sorry for the out of focus, but I saw a bunch of really good slides of this too. If you're not getting proper saccharization and developing that alcohol, you're not really going to have much luck getting to acetic acid bacteria in the second stage of fermentation. Sorry, if I'm sure other people are going to cover this. I only have 5 to 7 minutes. So yeast turns sugar into alcohol, and then you start turning the ferment, and then acetic acid bacteria live in the ethanol alcohol, and they turn that into vinegar, which essentially ceviches the seeds, right? We're going to lower the bitterness and the astringency. So just got to say, big leg up. That's my last slide, but basically we dry on mesh tables. It's the stuff we get it from Industrial Netting Supply. It's a PE mesh. I think it's 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. Dry it in the sun. I predict Susan Bassett's going to talk about binning beans overnight. The great challenge for us, since we're kind of more Puna vibes on Kauai, 50 to 70 inches of rain a year, it's not super dry, is getting it down to 7%. So we actually went and bought a secador. We have a big industrial dryer. After the beans have been on the table for a couple weeks, they're fully cured. They've done that. We'll finish them off to 7%. So yeah, and then, you know, we'll either bag them right up in Grain Pros, or we'll dry them a little bit. So I have a feeling I've gone on for at least 5 to 7 minutes. Dave, how am I doing?
You're still on target, Will.
Great. Yeah, and I just want to jump in and answer one of the things I saw. We extract nectar before we ferment. So I'll tell you how we do it. We started out doing it. Just get an ace bucket. You know, get a block of wood, drill holes in the bottom of the ace bucket, block of wood so you don't get all these plastic filaments everywhere, right? And then nest that in a second ace 5-gallon bucket with some clothespins or something. Put the wet seed in the top bucket, nectar will drip in the bottom bucket. At this point, we use large bins. We don't use the buckets to drip anymore, but to just get started, I'd recommend that. We don't collect it post-ferment, the stuff that drips out of the bottom of the box, because like, you know, there's funky stuff going on and spore forming stuff, mold stuff. So anyway, I think that's a hot 5 to 7 minutes, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more. So just great pleasure to be on this panel, and happy to be a part of this industry. I think we're going to see some radical growth in the next 10 years.
Yeah, mahalo, Will. That was great. We're gonna have a Q&A at the end. You can fire away with questions in our chat alongside, if you will. I think we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for the panelists actually to discuss and take questions live once we wrap up. So do hold them till the end. Let's go next over to John. John Ching is a general supervisor for coffee and cacao at Wailua Estates. John grew up on a ranch on Kauai and is a UH-CTAR graduate with 14 plus years of coffee farm management experience. And we're fortunate enough now to get all of that experience focused as well on cacao production and processing over the last year. So thanks for joining us, John. Hop on in.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Hey, everybody, I'm John. Fairly new to the industry. Going on, this is trying to finish up on our first cacao season at Wailua State. Most of my background is in coffee. So I'm glad to be a part of this webinar and excited to listen from everybody here, everybody that's sharing. trying to get new ideas and techniques how we can make improvements on our post-harvesting side, and ultimately just to listen and learn to everybody here. So our operation is a tree-to-bar operation. We're located in Wailua. Our two orchards border Kaukonahua Stream, Westfield, or West Side Orchard, Mill 12. That was the first farm was planted in 96, so about 20 acres. And the east side was recently planted in 2018 with an additional 60 acres planted. So total farm acreage is about 80 acres. And both farms are relatively low elevation, pretty close to sea level actually. And annually about 35 inches of rain. But as you guys all know, it's been a pretty dry season, especially on Oahu. Annually, currently right now, it's about 5 inches at the site, so really low rainfall. For the largest harvest of the year, this year was in April. Through the whole month, we harvested roughly just about 29,000 pounds of wet bean. So it's quite a busy harvest in April. Yeah. Next slide, please. So this is currently our general process during our bean extraction from the pods. So we use this pod splitter right here. So it's a multiple person operation, as you can see. There's a belt on the right where the workers are putting, pod by pod, one at a time, running up, and it gets split. And then the drum rolls, and with all the movement, the bean all separates and then falls down. And then from there, they collect everything. We fill our wooden boxes there. You can see the corner of the boxes there. So next slide. So yeah, definitely labor intensive. On slower days, slower times of the year, we can crack by hand when we're only harvesting, small quantities. But when it does get really busy and we're filling, 2 to 3 boxes every other day, it does get, quite a lot of bean. So just in the past few years, we were able to upgrade and get this box turner. So it's been a big help. As you can see on the top, the boxes are once they're filled and they're ready to be flipped, they get put up, hydraulic system lifts it up and easily just kind of pours it onto the bottom box. So definitely a big help, big labor savings, efficiency. Next slide. So generally our boxes are, the box on there, it's a 3x3x2 box. And during our fermentation process, they're usually about 8 days left in the box. Then we spread them out on the racks over here, as you can see. And they're on the racks and they're, raked daily, a couple times a day, just to ensure aeration and, proper drying. And we leave them on there between 1 to 2 days. And then from there, on the other side of our hot houses or hoop houses, they're all on concrete slabs. So we kind of, finish drying on the slabs. So for another week or two. Next slide. So our biggest challenges with our volume of our farm and the amount of employees we have it's basically harvesting and processing. This year, with our labor shortage, there was a lot of pods that we couldn't get around to harvesting. They were kind of left back on the tree, and it's like a whole process. When we pick, we kind of have to stage a site with our cracking machine and our crew, and from there we're kind of splitting up teams where we have to stop harvesting so we can process. So it's like a whole nother step that's involved, and it kind of slows down a lot of things. So this is a machine that's out of Brazil that we're kind of looking to purchase and procure. It's a toe behind cacao cracker, where it's kind of, as we're harvesting, the employees can collect and they can dump pods on that belt up there, and it's able to, crack multiple pods at a time. So, while we're in the field harvesting, we're harvesting and processing, simultaneously. So definitely, it's big efficiency there. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Yeah, mahalo, John. That's I think kind of explodes the head for most of us, just thinking about the scale you guys are operating at and the kinds of problems you're confronting and the tools that you have to solve it is really fascinating. So thanks for helping us stretch our scale here at the webinar with all the different farms that are being shared.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really interesting stuff. You guys put your questions for John in the chat or save them for our Q&A. We're going to keep things going because we're just getting started up here. Next, I want to introduce Susan Bassett. Susan is the co-owner of Mauna Kea Cacao, and she came to cacao farming after a career as an environmental engineer. Susan grows and processes award-winning cacao on her Cacao farm on Hawaiʻi Island, where she began farming full-time in 2016. I think prior to that, I'm led to believe she actually came and planted cacao on her vacations. One of their single estate bar made from their cacao won a 2018 Good Food Award, which is a really impressive and hard to earn award. So congratulations on that one, Susan. The cacao was also selected to be one of the entries in the 2019 International Cocoa of Excellence program from Hawaii. Susan, how are things over in Cacao today?
Nice day. Looked like it might rain, although the forecast was for no rain, and I was watching the weather because I've got beans out drying. So yeah, pretty typical here. Actually, we have had dry weather though, so it's been interesting. But anyway, it's been nice. Anyway, we could go ahead and get started with the first slide. So yeah, so we have been growing for 11 years. We started growing cacao with no farming experience previously. Came here, bought the land, and planted trees on vacations for 4 years. And as soon as we got here, actually moved here, we started processing from a rental house carport. But anyway, so we have typical Hamakua Coast soil, deep soil. It's actually the Hilo series soil. It's an andesol. It tends to be acidic, and we have to keep an eye on that. We have about 6 acres planted. Most of that is producing. We use wood, I'll say box fermentation. Actually, our boxes are octagonal, and we flip them manually, just scooping the beans into another bin. And our drying is sun drying in an open shed with a transparent roof and a black fabric floor. So pretty basic operation in terms of the technology that we're using. We're always looking for ways to become more efficient, but capital limited. So everything's a little bit at a time. And I guess the picture that you see of me here, I'm standing next to our new drying bin system, which we dry in an open air shed, so it can definitely rain in if it's windy and especially if it's misty. But over COVID, we actually built these new bins. We used to have bins, just trays on a stationary structure, and we would scoop the beans out because we always put our beans away at night. I think it's really important never to go backwards when we're drying. And so we do put the beans away about 4 o'clock in the afternoon so that they are protected from the night air. The next day, we put them back out. And that used to be a heavy lifting process, putting beans in buckets, scooping them into buckets, and then the next day lifting them all up and trying to distribute them evenly among the trays. But now we have these new double hinge system trays, which I like a lot because I'm not moving the weight without a lot of leverage, and it saves us a huge amount of time. So next slide. So this slide is showing me actually tilting the bin down so that the beans can roll out of the plastic bin that's on the end towards the center, out onto the tray. And I've built custom high density polyethylene or HDPE bins to go into the end of the trays. And in the early morning, maybe around 8 or 9, I actually put the beans out to dry for the day, assuming the weather is pretty good. Then in the afternoon, I'll tilt the bin the other direction, and all the beans will roll the tray, and all the beans will roll into the bin. So this is much less effort than what we used to do. And one of the reasons why we went to the system is because we were drying so many beans at one time. This is about a 30 by 50 foot drying shed, that if the weather would change quickly, I would be worried about the beans possibly getting wet. And I was running out of time sometimes to really get them all safely stowed in the plastic bins. So next slide. So this is actually showing me lifting the tray up, and all the beans are going to run into that white plastic bin. And then they'll be tilted up, as you saw in the first slide, with the lid that I'm holding placed on the top of the bin. And then those are safely stored for nighttime or during any storms. And I don't know if you guys were able to make the links work in a way that works on this presentation. Does that work, Sophie, or should people just maybe check the YouTube?
We're gonna post a PDF version of the slides where people
Okay.
can click on the YouTube videos afterwards.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, well, I would suggest that if you have time to look at that, it's amazing at how fast it is. And I love the sound of the beans running off the trays and into the bins. It's just makes me happy every time I hear it. So those are the links on the slide if people want to look at a later time. Next slide. So the benefits of the system, we have excellent cacao quality with very low bitterness, which people like. We haven't had any sort of a mold problem during drying since we implemented these trays, even though we have a really humid climate. And at nighttime, our relative humidity is 98% or more. So the beans can actually go backwards overnight if they're not in the proper environment. And then, you know, if the next day isn't a good drying day, you know, you're on a backward slide, that could be very worrisome. So this way, you know, we never have a problem with the beans molding during drying. Usually takes us about 2 weeks to dry completely. In the meantime, you know, as we're putting the beans in and out, and especially on the first few days after the beans come out of the fermentation, we do rub the beans a lot on the screens to try to get extraneous material off the beans. That makes them dry easier. It makes them look beautiful. And we literally have a restaurant customer, a 2-star Michelin restaurant, and the owner called me up and said that they were the most beautiful beans he had ever seen. So that always makes me super happy. From the worker standpoint, this is a really nice system. It requires minimal physical effort to put the beans in and out. And we have a nice, comfortable environment with a nice breeze through this open structure. So it's not, you know, it's not like a sauna or anything. It's just a really nice, breezy area to work. And then our profitability is improved. It really reduces our labor time and cost. And I would say that on our drying days, which is, you know, at least half the days of every year, we're saving between 45 minutes and an hour every day by using the system from what we did before. And that's all I have to say. I hope you liked it.
I love the ingenious adaptations you made, and especially for low capital investment to really increase efficiency. It's really, really smart work. So thanks for sharing that. And I know that is relevant to a lot of farms. I've seen a lot of cacao beans go to waste over the years because they couldn't dry in a high humidity environment. So really valuable, detailed system here. Thank you, Susan. If you have questions, throw them in the chat or hold them for our Q&A session at the end. I'm sure some of you do have questions about more of the details of how Susan dries her cacao. We're going to move along, and our next panelist who I'm excited to introduce, is Sage Hugh. Sage is the principal at Deep Dirt Farm, also on the Hamakua coast. He retired to a 15-acre farm in 2004 and began growing cacao in 2015 when one of his friends told him it was easy, effortless, and profitable. And nobody's proven him wrong since then. Isn't that right, Sage?
You call that a friend? No, that's an acquaintance now, ever since I got his advice. Yeah, we are on the Hamakua coast, about a mile away from Susan's farm. And Susan has been responsible for giving us tremendous knowledge. We could not have gotten where we are today without her help. We're at an average of elevation of about 450 feet. Most of our harvests are sold as dry beans, but we keep about 10% of our harvests to sell as chocolate for retail purposes under our Makai chocolate trademark. Honoka'a chocolate used our beans for single origin chocolate that won a medal at the 2021 Chocolate Alliance competition in Seattle. And we won the dry bean competition at this year's Big Island Chocolate Festival. Our trees are mostly 4 to 7 years old. We have 1,300 trees growing on about 3.5 acres. We have another 8 acres of pasture that we originally planned to plant in cacao, but there are just 2 of us, and we are both over 70 years old, and we have all that we can manage with what we have now. So barring a great change in profitability that allows us to hire some labor, we're probably not going to be increasing. We're always looking for things to reduce our labor time and make things easier for us old geezers. First slide. Turning beans during fermentation was a process that I saw could be made easier and faster. To let gravity help, we lift a full bin to dump into an empty bin so that the beans that had been on top end up on the bottom and the entire mass is mixed. Next slide. I constructed the bins of white oak. Unlike the yellow oak that can be found at Home Depot or Lowe's, white oak is highly resistant to damage from insects and rot. The bins measure 4 feet long by 2 feet wide by 2 feet deep. Each can hold up to 550 pounds of wet beans. The bins are on dollies so they can be rolled around our processing area as needed. Next slide. The oak boards are 1 inch thick and average about 6 inches wide. They are held together with straps and corner braces made of 18 gauge stainless steel. There are removable dividers so lesser amounts of wet beans can be concentrated into a mass conducive to fermentation. Next slide. To lift the bin, we have a system using sailboat rigging hardware. This is an inspiration from a time when we were sailors. To ensure the hardware can handle the weight of the loaded bin, we use all quality sailboat hardware in line with known load ratings. Next slide. A manual 2-speed winch is used to lift the beans. A power winch could have been used, but this winch keeps us true to the sailboat theme. A second smaller winch is used to tilt the lifted bin for dumping. the total cost of materials to make 2 bins and the hoisting equipment was about $2,500. To track the temperature in the bin with data, we use data loggers from ThermalWorks. This logger has 2 probes on wires so that we can measure temperatures near the top and bottom of the bean mass, and the logger is hung from a screw on the outside of the bin. The logger has a display showing current temperatures, but to access the logged data requires connecting to a computer through a USB port. You can see it, oh, excuse me. You can see a video of our system in operation on our website, deepdirtcacao.com, and we are scheduled to give a live demo.
We'll give Sage a moment here and see if his connection evens out. He had Hawaiian cacao and chocolate sailing into the future with this, using the sailing hardware for the low effort bean tumbling. That's really ingenious as well. I'm gonna invite Sage to interrupt me if he hops back in. He seems to be frozen, at least on my end. Does that seem to be everybody else's experience? I can see other folks moving. So okay, yeah, thanks for confirming that. We will move ahead then, and hope that he's able to rejoin us for Q&A. Go ahead and drop any questions for Sage into the chat. And I want to introduce a good friend, Seneca Klassen. Seneca is the founder of Lonohana Estate Chocolate. After creating his own line of bars called Bittersweet Origins and co-founding Bittersweet Cafe, a chain of chocolate cafes in the Bay Area, Seneca followed his dream to start his own estate-grown chocolate company, and Lonohana was born in 2009. It is a tree-to-bar chocolate company on Oahu that crafts world-class chocolate from Hawaii-grown cacao. And the Lonohana Estate Orchard is on the north shore of Oahu, and the factory is located in Kaka'ako, Honolulu. Seneca, welcome, and looking forward to see what you have to share about Lonohana's post-harvest processing today.
Thanks, Dave. Aloha kako. It's nice to see everybody here. Nice to get to see little bits and pieces of everybody else's operations. I think the sad truth about us as cacao farmers and chocolate makers is we don't get around and get to see all this cool stuff that other people are doing around the islands because we get stuck in our own little worlds doing our own thing, just grinding it out. Yeah. So like Dave said, we're a tree-to-bar chocolate company. We use all the produce we produce up at Lonohana Estate on the north shore of Oahu down at our factory on Queens Street in Kaka'ako. It's a 14-acre farm. It was established meaning the windrow trees and things were first planted in 2009, but really we've been producing chocolate from that farm since 2013. It's 14 acres, like I said, about 8 of those acres are planted in cacao. We will be producing upwards of 3 tons of dried, fermented dried beans this year. We use every bit of that to turn into chocolate, plus buy from fellow farmers around the islands of Hawaii as well. So everything we do up there is pretty low tech. It's a very low infrastructure farming area. Opaila Ridge is directly up above Haleiwa town on the slope on the north shore of Hawaii. Our elevation's about 400 feet. We work on wah oxasols up there, so very highly aged clays, which have some interesting features. Generally speaking, it's a pretty dry, windy, and aggressive place for cacao, but that has some beautiful features as well, notably drying. When it comes time to drying beans, we have very few issues in that regard. So everything for us is from the harvest forward. We use a nested bucket system when we're collecting cacao in the fields, like Will was describing, so we do capture some juice or nectar along the way. That all goes straight into our personal freezers in the end and gets drunk up before we ever give it to anybody, frankly, because like he was saying, it's kind of the best part of the whole gig. The juice is magic. So those go straight from those collection buckets, which you told about 40 pounds wet, into 1 meter square mahogany boxes for us, which is about a couple hundred kilos when they're properly full, so 400, 450 pounds-ish. In our high season, we're harvesting something roughly similar to what Will was suggesting as well. Every couple of weeks, we'll be pulling out probably 400 to 600 pounds of wet seed. Obviously that comes and goes as the season gets less intense, more intense. The past couple of years with our weird rainfall patterns and non-existent winters, our peak harvests have drifted from March or April, which is where they were sitting, similar to what John was saying at Wailua. And now they have really pulled for the past couple of summers well into June, July. So it's been very interesting to watch the season migrate on us a little bit as our weather patterns have been moving about. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see where things head. But basically we're a small agroforestry farm where we do, try and do our best to take care of the land and grow really good cacao and finish it as well as we possibly can. So our fermentation is monitored by data loggers because we have no power or potable water at our site. We have to use battery powered Bluetooth little data loggers. The ones we use are from Inkbird. They're super handy. They monitor RH and temp. We have a couple of them we use to monitor multiple boxes or multiple spots in the same box. And we also have been using for the past several seasons an inoculate, which is really just a kind of like farm sourdough starter that's cacao based instead of, if anybody's read about the kind of pineapple method of making a sourdough starter, we used a similar approach in the early days to use cacao juice and do roughly the same thing. That usually lives in my fridge in town between harvests because, like I said, we have no way to keep things kind of like safe and sane on the farm. But we bring up a dose of it whenever we're harvesting and use that inoculate as a starter. We can go through the slides, by the way. These slides are in not anything special. They're just some photos of the farm and our process. Go ahead through the next one for that matter. Just some pretty pods. Keep on going. That's so just speaking of inoculates and getting things started, this is just a picture of early days of probably a beginning of day 2, I think in the case of this photo. And, what we should all be looking for, nice and bubbly, lots of fluff, lots of CO2 being produced, a nice, sweet, alcohol-y smell. Next slide. This is just our little drying racks. So we dry in a hoop house at a particularly exposed and windy spot on the farm, which is kind of the opposite corner from where our fermentary sits, but not too bad for transport. So we pull things out of the fermenters and then run them up in an ATV to the drying site because it's just a pretty, like I said, an exposed spot. Really, really nice for drying though. So everything stays on these racks. Lots of agitation for the first couple of days, and then we're just hanging around there waiting until we hit some moisture targets, which leads to the next slide, I think. So yeah, we use one little tool we use in the drying house is just a moisture analyzing tool. In this case, it's a Dickie John product, I think, called a mini GAC. This just pings lasers off of the surface and gives you a surface reading of the moisture. 10.6, obviously not quite there. So this is like a backup data collection tool that we use to reinforce our farmer gut on when beans feel like they're getting into the zone. We're looking for this thing to register somewhere between 7 and 8%. Obviously, it's just telling you surface information, so the data being collected isn't truly giving you an indication of the water activity level inside the core of those seeds. But in my opinion, from the chocolate making side of things, you don't want no water activity level in the middle of those seeds anyway. So when we see this thing hitting 7-8% and we feel that there's still some nice give and suave texture to the beans that feel nice, but they're kind of well dried on the outside, that's usually the set of analytical tools that drive us to start collecting things and bagging them up and then bringing them down to the factory. So that is us. I will leave it there. Happy to answer any questions after.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Seneca. Yeah, opposite ends of the spectrum between Hamakua Coast and Opaiula Ridge. So really interesting to see that spread across the state. Keeping the ball moving here, I want to take it to a very special panelist, Dan O'Doherty. Dan, we kept you lined up as the closer here because we know, based on the depth of your knowledge, that it would be really valuable to have you speak last out of the round today. Let me share with you guys a little bit Dan's multifaceted role in the Hawaii cacao industry. He's definitely had played a big part in making a lot of other people successful in addition to his own projects. At Maui Ku'ia Estate, Dan is VP of Farm and Factory Operations. He is also an owner and operator at Kamananui Estate. owner and co-founder. Dan researched cacao and chocolate at Manoa until founding Cacao Services in 2012. And his firm, Cacao Services, designs cacao farms, conducts R&D on clonal selection and cacao breeding, and developed the first successful fermentation inoculate for cacao farmers in Hawaii. Internationally, Cacao Services works on post-harvest processing in over 20 countries to improve quality and import cacao for the US bean to bar market. And as VP of operations at Maui Kuia, Dan oversees farm management and quality, as well as making chocolate and coordinating factory operations, which have resulted in a Cocoa of Excellence Gold designation and a Good Food Award-winning chocolate. So lots of accolades building up there. Dan, welcome.
Hey, thanks. Stoked to be here. Really kind of impressed by some of the things, and I think what Will said about innovation, it's really coming true. I really love Susan's system of drying there. Sealing up at night is in the wet area is really cool. It really seems like this year and the last year during the pandemic, we've hit this kind of positive momentum where I think there's like a building of a collective pool of knowledge. You know, this existed, say, in Kona coffee for a while, but I feel like it's taken a while for it to kind of coalesce in cacao, but it seems to really be happening. So this is really great to see. Yeah, so I can do the first slide. We'll touch on this, so did Seneca. You know, about 10 years ago, we noticed, you know, and from working around the world that there's one unique problem to Hawaii, and that's slow fermentations. That in many other areas, you know, you can take fresh beans and not even 24 hours later see foaming and fermenting. And so this slide is just a picture on the left of 100 mils of cacao juice that was inoculated with a wild derived starter versus the same juice left out. And this is only about 8 or 10 hours, right? And so I think what Will was doing is leaving it out, and inevitably that one on the right would develop its own, you know, culture and could be used to inoculate. But what I saw was actually doing a little internship in Brazil with Mars, and they were deconstructing, you know, cacao fermentation microbes and isolating them and recombining them, and it worked, but you know, it was not really practical for most farmers. And so I thought, well, you know, do I really need to know and have an absolute pure culture to get a successful inoculate? And so that kind of led to this development of this wild starter, right? And I'll briefly say, you know, before there was any of this happening, right, people were using bread yeast, brewer's yeast. There's still people I know that use wine yeast, and all these things can work depending on you know, what you like to taste. Personally, I felt that they were not really ideal for cacao. There has been some commercial products only in the last 3 or 4 years. Scotch Lab, you know, has marketed these cacao specific yeast. I've tried them and I don't also particularly like them, and they're somewhat, actually they're very expensive. So this wild starter, and I no longer use it because at the farm in Maui we have enough frequent fermentation that I think there's kind of environmentally like a snowball of like inoculation. But I absolutely did use it for that 2019 harvest year for the Cocoa of Excellence Gold. So it works, but not always necessary. My method's a little more involved, and the reason is I use cryopreservation so that I can build a stock at the beginning of the season and draw from it throughout the year. So really pretty simple, some basic lab equipment is basically take a suspension by shaking cacao beans, usually around the 3rd day when it's transitioning from, you know, anaerobic to aerobic fermentation. So hopefully you're getting both yeast and acetobacter. Filtering that twice, first with a kind of coarse mesh to get out the big slime, you know, kind of fibrous pulp, and then filter paper, or even coffee to get out particulate, which would later serve as ice nucleation sites, which would then shear and destroy the solution. Add a cryopreservative, so food safe is like glycerol, easily available, and then aliquot this into little 10 mil centrifuge tubes. And if you have a not frostless, but rather a, you know, a chest freezer that doesn't have a defrost, that inoculate will store easily for a whole season. And simply press juice out. We usually ferment a minimum of about 150 kilos of wet. And so by taking out a little 100 mil of juice and 8 to 10 hours, just basically the night before, pitching that 10 mil in starts up that 100 mil, which then can be dispersed. So I liked it just out of a standardization point of view, and to just do it once and have it on hand and not worry about forgetting to set out a juice. So, I think Will's method's probably the most practical for people. If people want to know how to do this, I'd be happy to send you the protocol. It's simply some real basic lab equipment. You can order centrifuge tubes online. It's pretty much homebrew kind of thing. I know Will was using it for a while and then adapted his own, which seems to work. I know he also got a Cocoa of Excellence. I guess I don't need to go much more. I mean, the next slide just really shows what I guess Seneca already showed us. Ideally, 12 hours later, you have a real hot and bubbly, not hot, but bubbly, yeasty, alcoholic ferment. And I've seen many cases in Hawaii where if you don't inoculate, even 48 hours later, you don't have much activity. So not absolutely necessary, but I'd highly recommend to farmers with small volumes to take one of these various methods to get things kind of kick-started. And I like the idea of using wild yeast because, as opposed to commercial, because it's probably a part of the terroir effect, right? I don't really want to use commercial things from elsewhere. That, to me, my real passion and interest is really like between varieties, right, and environment. And that includes the microbial flora to really, I want Hawaii cacao to be really great, but I also think it needs to be super distinctive and have its own kind of identity. So that's it. So next slide is a little bit more about boxes, which again, I feel redundant, sorry, going at the end, but these boxes are 180 kilo capacity. For farmers that are thinking about making boxes, very conveniently, wet cacao is about the same volume as water. So, 100 liters is 100 kilos. Really easy. I use this maple. It's actually plywood, but it's made with a soy-based and actually food grade adhesive. So not that expensive per sheet. Use furring strips to kind of hold the whole thing together. Make sure that none of the nails or screws penetrate and could react with the cacao. So as it goes for filling boxes, always leave an inch or so at the top because the cacao will expand during the first couple of days of fermenting, and you don't want to have like a mounding effect. Another very convenient little piece of math here is, generally speaking, in Hawaii, the number of pods you need to fill a box. So I like to go no lower than 150. I find below that, you start to get some real instability. Some ferments will be excellent. Some will be kind of somewhere in between, but 1,500 pods, more or less, will give you 150 kilos of wet cacao. So real easy. 5-gallon buckets hold 20 kilos. I harvest at no more than a 3-week interval. 2 is safer, especially if it's really hot and dry. And you can see that, but absolutely, you can get great results. And for a lot of small farmers, I know I hear people say, oh, we gotta harvest every week or maybe every 2 weeks. But the real challenge when you have a small or young farm is getting a sufficient mass all at once, right? And so I think John mentioned, in April is 29,000 pounds of wet. And I've actually tracked those, harvest flow over several years, a long time ago. And what you see there and what I see here on my farm in Maui is the peak month is typically double the productivity of the shoulder months on either side of it. And the tail months, you're not getting quite enough if your farm is small and young. So push out to 3 weeks if you have a small farm. You can see in this case, I have 3 data loggers. This is top, middle, and bottom. That's simply because this was a trial that I really wanted a tight measurement. And you do see quite a differential. Usually the top heats the fastest, the middle is well in between, and the bottom is very slow. And you'll notice if you turn a ferment, especially on the first turn, the bottom will be relatively cold and still smell like fresh cacao pulp. So a little zoom in on this last slide is just these data loggers. These are the ones I use. They're like $150. They're Bluetooth, so you have this external mountable box, and you have this 6-foot probe that you can insert into the center. So typically speaking, I only use one in the center as a kind of monitoring system. So a good rule of thumb, so I program these they log continuously, they average every 15 minutes is how I have them configured. And to me, that's enough data. A good rule of thumb, if you don't know any better, there's a lot of visual cues. It should eventually smell kind of like an apple cider vinegar. You should hopefully not have much off smells, kind of putrefaction. A 7 or even 8-day ferment, which I know some people do in Hawaii because it is a slow start. You will always have a little bit of off smell in the corners at the bottom. Usually not a problem, but if it goes too far, that's no good. But interpreting this data, so you can offload this to your phone. I usually put it up on the computer. There's a freeware app where you can measure the duration of the ferment, or I'll even drop a pin. A critical temperature is 110 Fahrenheit or around 45 C. So at that point, you're in full aerobic fermentation. And what I found is that it depends on the cacao, it depends on the preference for how you like your cacao to taste. Some chocolate makers like really heavily fermented cacao. Other people, like say Guittard and Valrhona, really like what a lot of bean to bar chocolate makers would say under fermented cacao. But generally speaking, about 3 days at or over 110 degrees, all other things being good, will give you a well fermented cacao. That's kind of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. That was a huge download in about 10 minutes for you guys. I hope you were furiously taking notes. But if you weren't, we are going to make this recording available. There is an impressive amount of knowledge from all of these farmers, both with the deep science that Dan brought to the table, also with site-specific solutions for the rainy, wet, high humidity origins, as well as full sun kind of drier locations like the North Shore of Oahu. So there's an impressive breadth of scale and also site conditions that came together. Before I had promised a Q&A, I think we got a lot of it done in the chat, and I know everybody's itching, if you didn't start your pauhana already, to get out the door. So we're going to wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. Before we do, I wanted to provide some important information to everybody here and also to the full cacao growing world in Hawaii. There's going to be a really important event coming up in November that the Hawaii Chocolate and Cacao Association is hosting and organizing on the Big Island. And Colin Hart is here to talk about one of the opportunities that will be offered to those who are able to attend, which we encourage you all to do. Colin, can you say hi and join us? Oh, I think you're still muted. Nope, not yet. We're not getting any sound.
Yeah, I'm not muted right now.
Okay, we can hear you great now. Thanks, Colin.
All right, hey everybody. Yeah, I'm just here my name's Colin Hart. I'm just here to promote this year's HCCA conference, which is happening this year on Big Island, and it's happening from Friday, November 11th to that Sunday, the 13th. And my role in that event is basically just to give a walking tour of the Manoa variety trial, which was planted at my farm in 2018 or 2019. So the trees are. Cacao Farming 101. Sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we got you, Colin. If I can invite everybody other than Colin to mute, please, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So yeah, just going to give a walking tour of my farm and the Manoa variety trial, which was planted in 2019. So I believe the picture is of that variety trial right now. So trees are almost 3 years old, coming up in December. And I'm just going to be talking about my experience in managing the trial. So fertilizing, pruning, and just some of my general takeaways in terms of which varieties I like and don't like, and which varieties I think have a lot of potential to benefit the industry in the coming years. So yeah, hope to see people there. So that's gonna be on the last day of the HCCA event, so Sunday, the November 13th. So yeah,
How
thank
many
you.
how many
Thanks, guys.
varieties are in that trial, Colin?
Okay, so there's 20 varieties planted in the trial with 10 replicates each. So there's 200 trees total. And there's about 7 or 8 varieties in the trial that are either selected or bred in Hawaii. And then the rest are common or not so common varieties that are planted all over, Central and South America. So a very wide range of genetic material.
That is going to be really fascinating. You can see that the trees look like they're in peak condition, so really good job farming and growing those trees, Colin, and a great learning opportunity for everybody. We talked about, that's a whole nother vital component to cacao quality and producing premium quality here in Hawaii is the varietal selection. So come on out. What else is going to be happening at the annual conference, Will? You're president of HCCA, drop some knowledge on us.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Dave. I mean, this one really goes out to our Big Island directors who just put together a smash bang of an event, folks. Should be really good. Really recommend for everyone to come out. This is a Cacao Farming 101 event, sort of the day before the conference, that should just be filled with useful information for getting started as a cacao farmer, and just great basics for everybody, best practices, some really interesting stuff. The schedule is almost finalized, and we should have the signups and the links available to purchase tickets within about a week. So please check back mid next week. Really excited. Love to have everyone. Director Susan Bassett's on the call. She may have other things to add to that as one of our Big Island members.
Thanks, Will. Susan?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a great conference, and the Cacao 101 will be really fun ahead of that. That's a nice event for people, especially those who are starting out, because it's going to cover a bit more of the basics. But for the main conference, we have someone coming in from Nicaragua, who actually farms in a wet environment similar to what some of us are farming in. And I think it'll be really nice to hear from him, but also, some of the best bean to bar makers and potential cacao buyers are coming due to the efforts of Greg, and I never say his last name right. Will, can you help me out here?
Dallas.
Yes.
Dandelion
So
chocolate.
for all of the people who are farming and want to learn how to produce quality beans, and also are looking for markets for their beans as they progress up the experience level, and I think it's going to have something for everyone, and I'm really excited about it being in the Hilo vicinity. Thanks, everybody.
Very well said, and thanks, Dave, for the plug. We really love to have everyone out and just kind of keep the coalition growing.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know there's a lot of good thought and work that the volunteer board of the ACCA has been putting into this. And, I would say put together by farmers for other farmers. So a lot of times it's the kinds of nuts and bolts stuff that you guys heard here today as well, of how to get things done, that is really important and valuable. So please come join us. I'll be there as well. Before we wrap up, I want to invite everybody to fill out our quick poll that popped up on your screen as part of the Zoom event. If you could just take 30 seconds to click through, that would help us report out to the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program about how important it is to provide this kind of programming for farmers in Hawaii, and we would appreciate that. I want to also let you know that this webinar is being recorded, will be made available. We will send out an email to everybody who registered for the event, and also make it available on our website if you want to revisit any of the best details or share with other farming friends. And with that, we can go to the last slide. And I just want to give a heartfelt mahalo to all of the panelists for really opening up and sharing your expertise today. We deeply appreciate you. It was a lot of fun, and I'd like to do this again sometime. And also want to say mahalo to the Hawaii Department of Ag and USDA NEPA for their support for our programming. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening and happy planting. Aloha.